My name is Mildred Clonts, and the last name is spelled Clonts. My ancestor came over in about 27 to Philadelphia. He was German. With his family, he could not speak English. The name was Glantz, and so it has been, the English-speaking people changed it to Clonts, Clonts, and sometimes Klonts or Z. And so that's the name that originally was. Mother came in 23. She graduated from Santa Fe High School in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Her father had asthma, and he had relatives. They were from Pennsylvania, and he had relatives in Stewart, the Wileys. And her grandparents were down here in the winter, and her uncle was here permanently. And so they came back east because they were getting a little homesick for family, and so they moved back to where there were relatives already living in Stewart. They thought it'd be a better climate for her father than Pennsylvania.
Do you know if it was? Did his health improve?
He died in 1926, I think, from asthma.
Got to live
Oh yes,
a little longer.
yeah, that's right.
Okay. Your mother's age when she came and what she did?
Well, she must have been just out of high school, I think. She would like really to major in music and gone on to college, but because of her father's illness, he had saved up enough money that they could live, but he wasn't able to work, I don't think, at the time. So that she got a job. She was a good secretary, and that's what she did. And eventually, she worked for Hart Getson, who would become my uncle because she would marry his brother-in-law, Arthur Clonts. She worked in the same law office where my father was, and then they got married.
Can you tell us about him, about his family and where he came from?
Well, he came from Central Florida, and some of his cousins were in the legislature. He had 5 children. 2 of them, the boys, were doctors. One was a surgeon, and the other's a heart specialist. He's still practicing in California. Then he had another son who has his doctorate in something in biology and is taught in college in North Carolina. Then the 2 girls married and had families, and they both live in the Tampa area.
Were any of those children born here in Stewart?
Yes, some of them were. Harriet was born here. I'm not sure if the others were, but I know Harriet was born. My cousin Harriet was born here.
And what have you been told that your uncle did when he was here in Stewart? He was a lawyer?
Yes, he was a lawyer, and that's when my father came here to practice with his brother-in-law. And then he had a better opportunity and moved over to Central Florida. And he was always a very southern accent. He and my aunt both had such a drawl and such a southern way of speaking, such a gentleman, such a nice way, so friendly. I was always so glad to see him and enjoy him very much, and my aunt Rachel, his wife, too.
Okay, tell me his full name. You called him Uncle Hart, but his full name was Thomas Hart?
Yeah. Was it Thomas or Thompson?
Thompson, you're right.
Thompson Hart Getson, I think is what it was.
Right, and he is in the picture when the people were in Tallahassee and they signed for Martin County. Yeah. So that's why I'm asking you all these questions.
Yes, because he was there, yeah.
And there was another Getson in the picture, but you're saying that he had cousins in the legislature?
Yes, that's right. There was a Jim Getson. I remember Jim Getson, who was in the legislature at Tallahassee.
I would imagine that made things a little more comfortable for the delegation from Martin County to have someone with relatives up
right,
there.
Yes, Okay. They were, active politically and in the law and that kind of thing.
Okay, your first memories when you were a little girl here, people you knew and things you did?
I think my first memories would have been playing out in the sandy yard. Everybody had sandy yards. I don't remember anybody trying to cultivate a lawn very much in those days. It was everything was very informal. A lot of the houses were just little wooden houses, and it's not anything like it was today. You know, some people might have a few flowers, but you felt safe walking even all along US 1. Going to school, I rode my bike away on US 1 every day when I went to school, or even when I was very small, would walk all the way from Bessie Addition all the way to 4th Street. It was 4th Street then, and all the school was all in one place. From we had no kindergarten, but from 1st grade through high school was all on the same property on 4th Street.
Okay, so your first home was in Bessie Addition. Describe where that is for people.
When you come off of Roosevelt Bridge, that you would think it would be probably the. I don't think there's a light there. After that second light, and you cross Fraser Creek, you turn the right going toward the river. There's a little. There are houses there, and now there are big apartment. There were some apartment buildings right on the river then. Cleveland Avenue, the First Avenue, is where I lived, and the Bosones lived there too. They're an old family and did a lot for the community.
And the Wiley family, which you said are your relatives?
My Wiley grandparents lived there before I was born.
Okay.
My grandfather Wiley died in a car accident before I was born, but he had been, as a young boy, he'd gone off and fought on the northern side in the Civil War. I had great-grandparents on both sides in the Civil War. And so he survived that. And he lived a while in Virginia, moved back to Pennsylvania, and then part-time he lived in Florida.
So this is your grandparents or your great-grandparents?
The Wileys were my great-grandparents.
Good heavens. So you had that many generations come to this area.
Yes, they were my great-grandparents, and my mother's mother was my grandmother, and then she remarried a man by the name of John Rhodes, who was a widower who had come down here to live he originally grew up in Long Island.
Okay, you have some pictures of
Yes.
family at the beach. Will you tell us about them?
Yes, I have some pictures here that I brought. They were taken in the 1920s.
And the people in the pictures besides your family?
The first one I have is my mother, and I was 3 months old at the time, and they have a little table there that my grandfather Wiley had made, and they've got a blanket on it, and there's the little house with the screen front porch in back of us. And this was taken when I was 3 months old, when I was born May 14th of June, July, that had been August. The next month was the terrible, terrible hurricane in 28 when so many people were killed. And in order to escape the hurricane, they took me and we went to Miami and stayed during the hurricane in a hotel there. When we came back, the roof of the house was entirely gone, the top of the house. Then this was about 1925. It just shows the Australian pines in the yard, children standing, and absolutely not a blade of grass or anything in the yard, just very bare at that point. Then this is Evans and Tally Crary, whom I call Aunt and Uncle, though I'm not related. There's a picture of Aunt Tally holding, and there's one of the old Fords in the background. We were at the beach, and this is another one, shows Aunt Tally and Uncle Evans, and you can see there's nobody on the beach. Most of the times when we would go, and I remember that, you usually would have the beach to yourself, not that many, and of course you had to drive over that really old rickety bridge going across to Jensen Beach. And here's another one where we are, Daddy and Aunt Tally and Uncle Evans on the beach. And here's another one with us at the beach, who kind of, Mother said we would go over there a lot to the beach and just have supper. Daddy had learned to do some outdoor cooking as a Boy Scout, and so we would just go over there and have supper, have the beach all to ourselves when we were little.
So your parents were friends with the Craries even before they came, or did
my father and Uncle Evans were at Gainesville at law school together and good friends, and they both ended up in in Stewart practicing law, and so that's why when the children arrived, they called they were aunt and uncle to us, and my parents were aunt and uncle to the boys.
Such good friends.
Yes.
Now, since Evans Query Sr. Has a bridge named for him,
Yes, Uncle
name,
Evans.
Survives.
Yes.
Will you tell us a little bit about him?
Oh,
Your memories?
he was such a handsome man, a fine-looking man, and uh, cheerful and happy, and just the most delightful person and the dearest person. He was, and Aunt Tally was so much in love. All their married life, they were just so in love with one another, you know, and they just enjoyed being together so much.
So, I see him holding you or with you as a baby.
Yes.
You said you were the first.
Yes, I was the first child of the two couples. Yes, I came first, and then my sister, and then Sonny, and then Buddy. I call them still Sonny and Buddy.
These are the Prairie Boys.
Boys. Uh-huh.
I know that you were friends with other people in the
With the
community.
Krugers, yes, the Krugers, and we would go out at night on the boat. They had a boat, and especially moonlight nights on the river. It was just lovely. By the time I have any memories that we were in a depression, and so you were just glad to do anything that was fun, or you could make your own fun because nobody had any money.
Which Krugers are you speaking of?
Rady Bell and Bert. No, Rady Bell and Carl Kruger, and then we knew Bert Kruger too.
But the children.
Carl, John, and Rudolph were the children. Yes, I have lots of pictures of us together at Easter eggs with the Crarys and Krugers. The Krugers and the Crarys lived right one back of the other. The Krugers lived right behind the Crarys.
They were neighbors.
Yes, yes, for through the years. That's right. That's right.
Tell me about Easter. There was a special place that you'd go and have Easter eggs at the beach?
Yes, that's right. We went with the Kruger family, and they had other members of the family, some that came up, I think, from West Palm Beach and that kind of thing. And we would go over there. There used to be a lot of, just north of where you would say Jensen Beach is today, there were a lot of Australian pines growing up there. So it was kind of shady and nice, and you had the trees. And we would go over there at Easter and hide eggs and have Easter egg hunt at the beach.
So that's a happy memory.
Yes, yes, because it was, I think there was probably some grass growing and things like that. It wasn't right on the beach, just right off the beach with the trees, and it was a lovely place to go to. But you had it all to yourself, you know.
That's nice. Growing up in Stewart and going to school, will you describe your school? And you said that it was all in one place.
That's
but,
right, that's right.
Your teachers, your equipment, did you have much?
No, we didn't have much. Teachers had a bell to ring for us to come in. We didn't have any extra equipment at all. You know, it was just very hard times, and it was a very small school. And even when I graduated, there were only 28 in my class, but that's because World War II, and you know, people had scattered. The war was over. Some of the veterans had come back, but you know, everybody knew one another. And the teachers knew your parents, and your parents knew them. And it was just a very small town. Of course, things changed when in 41, when the war came, because then we had so many servicemen and their wives. The town was just filled with servicemen and their wives.
Your father was a judge?
Yes.
Tell me a little about that.
Oh, well, it's so different than now. Today, I understand you almost have to have you really have to have an appointment it's very hard to see the judge. But then the judge's office, just like the school, everything was open. Anybody that had a problem would come in. The poorest cracker in Indiantown could come in and sit down and talk about his problems to my father. Everything was open, and the judges then had the marriage licenses, and they had the hunting and the fishing license and the driver's license, so everybody knew him. And Daddy would go one day out of the year, like to Indiantown, so that people could come to him there, and easy access to get the driver's license, and then he'd go to Jensen and the other places and that sort of thing. And people sometimes who didn't want a publicity about their marriage would come up on the weekend, wealthy people or somebody, and get married. And one time they, in the little house over there in Bessie Addition, my daddy was marrying this couple, and he looked up, and there was on the bedroom was just off the living room, and he could see my grandmother had pulled the curtains back, and there she was peering and watching the marriage going on. So it was an interesting life, and you just and all the county judges were just like cousins then. And when they would get together, they had the best time. And they went to Cuba. Can't go to Cuba now, but they went to Cuba one time. They went various places for their meetings, and they just like a group of young cousins getting together. They just had nicknames from one another and that sort of thing. It was just a wonderful time.
Did you feel special because your dad was a judge? Were you given any special attention?
No, I don't think so. Not that he was judged, it's just simply that it was nice to have a father. He was a very honest person and a good person, and it was nice to have. I had a good relationship to my father. Sometimes we went to New York City together and took some trips and that sort of thing and had a good time. That meant more to me. But it was a very democratic time. It didn't make any difference what anybody's father, we didn't. You didn't have to have special clothes. You're just glad to have clothes to wear to school. It wasn't that kind of a thing where you really felt Gene Parker's daddy was the doctor in town and that sort of thing. But that didn't make any difference. It was very democratic. You didn't feel that type of thing. I don't think
it wasn't too much class distinction.
No, there was no class distinction in high school. Not one bit of class distinction at all.
Okay, you mentioned Dr. Parker. Will you tell me a little about him?
Oh, yes. Dr. Parker was wonderful. And I think one time Daddy went to see him and gave him $3, and he followed him out on the sidewalk and gave him $1 back anyway. That was Dr. Parker. He was just so good and so helpful. And he even when he was, even a few years before he died, when he'd see me, he'd say May 14th. He remembered the date of my birth. He remembered coming over, what time he came, how long he waited till the birth. He remembered waiting for other people to be born and what they fed him and that sort of thing. He just remembered everybody, and he was so interested. And he was a very democratic person himself, The fact that he was a doctor, he was a doctor who was there to serve people, and black as well as white, there was no difference, even though he come from Ludowici, Georgia. And when he died, half his pallbearers were black. I assume they were his babies that he had delivered, but I'm not sure. But he was a very democratic person too.
Would you elaborate on this this black and white situation being in the South? And,
yes, we were very, very segregated. And I really am sorry I didn't get to know any of the black people that were my age. I really feel cheated about that. There would be women in East Stewart now that we would be probably really good friends and have grown up and known one another, but we were really very segregated. We saw black people. My mother was from the North. She liked to do all her own work, and she didn't have black people in the home doing the work, so I didn't get to know them in that way. Where other people sometimes, the Parkers always had somebody in the home, and they were both from Georgia. But that was a shame. I thought I didn't like that. I didn't like even as a small child, I disliked those signs that said white only or colored only. It bothered me, and I'm glad we don't have those signs anymore.
That's surprising, because some people I've talked to said they just never thought about it.
I did, from a small child, a very small child. I was aware of the injustice of it all. And I was always interested in current events and listened even when I was in the second grade. I think Queen Elizabeth's grandfather was dying, and I didn't want to go to school because I wanted to listen to the service from England. So I was interested. I was into current events and history and news from the time I was a very small child.
Did your parents do something to cultivate this interest?
No,
Just
I
was
just born that way.
just born that
Born
way.
that way.
Was there a teacher that had a particular influence on you, or just generally that you remember as outstanding?
No, I remember all my teachers, but I don't remember one. I just was so into my own things, I think, and what I wanted to know and what I wanted to study and books I wanted to read, that kind of thing. I was a little different, I think, than others, and Miss Shure at one time said that whenever you talk about history, the boys and girls always listen to what I say, and so it was more my own interest and my own drive, and now I'm writing a book about Black history, and so that's just a great experience for me.
That's great. When I interviewed the true pioneers,
Yes.
and realized how little educational facilities they have,
Yes.
I come across people who are self-motivated and cultivate their own culture and their
That's
own.
right. You had to do it.
And so even when there was nothing, you had a little here. Can you remember the theater, the movie
Oh
theater?
my goodness, that was the big deal. Every Saturday, you at least had a dime during the Depression, and everybody would end up on Saturday afternoon to see the cowboy movie, and then a B-rated movie, and then a cartoon, and usually a cereal. That was a big deal, and everybody was there on Saturday afternoon.
And even though you were a little more studious than some, you were right there with everybody else.
Oh yes. I never felt apart. I just knew what I was, and during World War II, we had just a small library, and the librarian said to me, "You are the only female that ever comes in here." I was about 14 then, that reads books about World War II. So, but I didn't talk about it to the others. I just went ahead and was friendly with everybody else, went with my friends, did their things, but then I did my thing as well, see, the history thing.
Now, the library, the public library, do you have any memories of using it?
Yes. Oh, yes. I loved that. It was over there in the old Woman's Club building, near where the old Methodist church is, right up from there. And I used it very often. I've always loved books, always loved library. We couldn't buy any books in Stewart. We would go to West Palm Beach, and they had them in the Halsey and Griffith. And I was just always so thrilled when I could get over there to where the books were. Just always loved books and reading.
Do you think your mother and father were happy that they came to this little town?
Oh, yes. I think they loved Stewart. They played baseball. On a team, they played tennis. And they fished. And we went to the beach often. And then, of course, in the summer, we'd take trips up north. I was the only child, I think, that got up north because we had relatives up there and could stay with, and it didn't cost us anything. We could go into New York, and we went to the 39th World's Fair and that sort of thing, went to things around Washington. Daddy usually had some kind of business in Washington. We'd stop over there in Mount Vernon. And, of course, I loved all the historical places, Gettysburg and things like that. So we had that, and that was wonderful.
When I'm thinking that your father came in 1926, right after the county was formed, and also Evans Prairie.
Yes.
And at that time, there was so much business, and that was an attraction for attorneys who were getting their jobs.
Yes.
But, of course, that fizzled.
Yes, that's right.
But your dad stayed, and Evan stayed.
That's right.
Now, everybody else who gathered here did not stay, like your uncle.
That's right, moved on.
So do you have any idea why they were able to stay and the others left, or why they wanted to stay?
Well, I think they were settled here and they just liked it and were able. My mother was very creative about cooking. Somebody paid my daddy with a cow. Somebody gave him sweet potatoes, fish. I think some people paid Dr. Parker the same way, and you just survived,
So they liked it here, and they had...
Yes, they liked it here.
Yeah.
They really liked it here. In fact, with my mother, my daddy loved traveling, and he went abroad some, but my mother's such a homebody. When she would go north to Pennsylvania, and Daddy would just love it up there and love going into New York and things. Mother would get homesick for Florida, even though she came from Pennsylvania. So she just really loves it here, always has.
And you are wildlife lovers. Will you tell me a little about how that was cultivated and what you think?
Oh, we always had. I had dogs ever since we were little. Of course, I loved cats as well. And then finally, there was allowed to get a cat. And then we had a lot of peacocks out there where we are. But we've always enjoyed.
I'm thinking of the wild birds you have out there.
Oh yes, we have lots
buntings.
of wild birds and pileated woodpeckers, and in the fall, lots of warblers come through and that sort of thing.
So maybe tell us where you live today.
We live out on 76, 12 acres. Mother has built and designed a big house out there. My father was living when they moved. He's since passed away. She has some cottages, and I moved back to be near my parents, and I'm glad I could be here before. My daddy had several more years after I came back, and I stay out there with my mother. I have a little cottage. I stay in the cottage.
Oh, nice.
I have a big shepherd and a cat and a peacock.
Okay. Anything else that you think we should talk about that is significant about this community, different from others, or?
Well, as I've said before, there was a very democratic, on the whole, at least from my perspective, going through the schools here, that everybody was friendly. Nobody felt, I don't think, that they were, at least in my age group, no one felt that they were better than anybody, no matter what their father did. If he was a fisherman or a county judge, it didn't make any difference. Everybody was friendly. Everybody had a good time. We made our own fun, and we just had a really good time.
That's good.
I can't think, there was a lot of vacant lots then. It wasn't so grown up, And World War II came. It made a big difference, a big change. Of course, we had the German U-boats and things right off the coast, and we had to keep the shades down at night. And if you drove, you just had a little bit of light on your car that you could drive by, and people were killed, in the ships off the coast. So that changed our lives, and we just had lots of soldiers all over town. So, but up until that time, it was a very sort of innocent life and easygoing, and we made our own fun and had our little picnics, and everybody felt so safe and secure. It was just a great place to grow up in.
As a little postscript, since they are interested in everything, why don't you just tell me a little bit about your project, your book that you're working on?
I'll tell you how I got into it. The organist and the music director of our church knows that I'm interested in hymnology, and she asked me to do a historical paper at the worship service, and then another one on Isaac Watts. And then I got so interested in history about Protestant, every average people, so I started my own historical association. It's interracial, and some of the people there are Black Episcopalians. They got me interested in Black history. And I did a paper then for our church on the beginning of Black history in America. And out of that, people encouraged me to write a book. And so in order to do that paper, I contacted some of the historians of the historic Black churches in Philadelphia. And this is where, by 1810, there were more free Blacks in Philadelphia than in any other city in the United States. And it's right over the border from the Mason-Dixon line. And when slaves were freed in the South, especially the Upper South, they were not allowed to live there because the white people were afraid that they would stir up the slaves. They weren't really good. They didn't want them around. So they ended up in Philadelphia. And it was just a great place. A lot was happening. The first Black Episcopal priest was there, and the first the Methodist, the minister started the first independent Methodist denomination. The first Black Presbyterian church was there, and so I got interested in these people, and I just started writing a book. And the book will be entitled "Struggling to Overcome Slavery: Jones, Allen, and Gloucester." Those are the three ministers. So, but I started with the West Indies connection. So many of the slaves came. So my first chapter is about all that happened with slavery in the West Indies, and how the slaves were brought, and the ideas about slavery from the West Indies to the colonies.
Thank you for sharing that. It's very interesting.
Okay.